sentence memorandum from the Attorney General, which I have also read and considered. So we are now at the stage where I will hear from the Attorney General, and I will hear from defense counsel, and I will hear from the defendant should he choose to make a statement. Ms. Povolitis.
Your Honor, will we ever truly know the breadth of the evil acts committed by this defendant? After 156 women came forward to share their heartbreaking experiences in Ingham County over the course of 7 days, 48 new voices emerged to speak here in Eaton County, and 12 women spoke in both counties. These women shared raw, emotional testimonies of not only what he did, but what effect those acts had on their lives and those of their families. Just as you told Annie Labrie her story and her experiences matter, their experiences weren't redundant. They not only showed the defendant's crimes and depravity, but the far-reaching effects that those crimes have had on so many. The breadth of the defendant's abuse and destruction is nearly infinite. It affects not only this county, Eaton County, but Michigan State University communities. It spans the state of Michigan, reaches club and elite training gyms, college athletics, and even the United States and international Olympic committees. Few sports were saved from his predatory behavior. Over a dozen different sports brought athletes to him who he abused. He practiced and perfected abuse spanning over 25 years and included countless victims, beginning before he was even a doctor. But our focus here today is on Eaton County and the acts he committed at Gedarts Twistars Gymnastics Club. Many victims, including all 3 charged victims for which he has pled, were abused at Gedarts Twistars Gymnastics Club here in Eaton County. Those young girls were also abused, those same 3, at his sports med clinic and at his home, and there are countless other victims whose venue transcends counties. The basic facts of his assaults have been recounted by the charged victims in this case, as well as the numerous victims who've given impact statements both here and in Ingham County. The facts that the defendant admitted to under oath, that he penetrated these young girls' vaginas and anuses with his bare hands, not for any legitimate medical purpose, but for his own sexual pleasure. He had erections as he performed these so-called treatments, and the children, his victims, were often prepubescent, unaware of their bodies. Children whose parents sat feet away. Children that this grown adult man took sexual pleasure in the humiliation and exploitation of those young girls and teenagers. As Rachel Denhollander told you on Friday, not only did he commit those depraved acts of penetration, but he liked it. He supposedly practiced osteopathic manipulative medicine, but in truth, he was a master manipulator. He manipulated victims and parents. And in competitive gymnastics, especially at the elite training gym, Twistars, he found the perfect place for his master manipulation. In gymnastics, you do what you're told. You hide your pain and you hide your injuries. These young girls were constantly under the microscope and always on display. This nice guy doctor thrived at a place like Twistars, where cruel, harsh, mean, and abusive coaches were the norm. He was the nice guy who could help these girls, become their confidant. Gymnasts at Twistars had to be seen and treated by him. They were told they were so lucky to have him at their gym. cloaked in the prestige of the United States Gymnastics Association and Michigan State University. An Olympic doctor who treated these young girls heroes. He was the Olympic doctor, purported to have some special knowledge a regular therapist or doctor didn't have. He was the perfect and the only doctor to see. And he was available and eager to help, even right here in rural Michigan in Eaton County. The victims and their parents felt special to be able to see him. He adorned his office with pictures of the Olympians he treated, with the far places his supposed expertise took him. He brought back tokens for his victims, gifts he used to groom them and gain their trust. And he was much more than just a doctor. He was Larry. He was their friend, a family friend. You heard from one victim, he was nearly a confirmation sponsor for her sister. And what you heard were these Monday nights in the back room at Twistars. It's almost unbelievable. Back locker room, people coming in and out, parents and coaches outside, young girls lined up one after the other to be, quote, treated by the purported gymnastics god. But instead, young, prepubescent girls lined up, one after the other to be abused. A cattle call of victims. As one victim pointed out, 2 years or 104 Mondays of abuse is what she suffered. The defendant not only robbed these children of their innocence, but he robbed many of them of their good health. You heard so many heartbreaking stories of unnecessary treatments, misdiagnoses, inaccurate medical treatment that resulted in lasting and permanent damage. Many of these survivors wonder whether their now lifelong injuries could have been treated had he not wanted to continue access to their young bodies. He wasn't a world-renowned doctor. As one of our experts so eloquently put it in preparing for this case, he was performing hocus-pocus medicine. I've often wondered throughout the course of this 17-month journey, did he really think he was going to get away with it? Abusing so many for so many years, over 2 decades, so many sports, no patient, no child was safe. And yet, he also abused so many prominent gymnasts. Maybe he did think he could beat the odds, and for years he did beat those odds. His lies worked. This court heard from women some decades later who were initially determined to be confused or to be liars. He was believed over these children. And with each time he got away, he was empowered to continue and perfect his abuse and his techniques even more. Your Honor, it should not take finding a collection of 37,000 vile and disgusting images of child pornography to believe these women and girls. It should not require a life-altering journey for a vigilant and determined woman to expose abuse. Investigative reporters should not be the only ones who are trusted to tell the truth. But thank God law enforcement found those images. Thank God that Rachel persisted. And thank God that journalists took note and followed up and investigated. But it should be easier than that. It has to be easier than that. And it can be. We must all start by believing victims when they tell, regardless of who the adult is, or what prestige he carries, or the title he holds. With this sentencing, I have had even more takeaways than I had a little over a week ago in Eaton County. There are 2 things I wish to highlight. First, we must stop blaming. Stop blaming victims. Stop blaming parents. And second, we must transform this pain and this anger and this hurt into something good. Victim shaming has to stop. It is so hard for these victims. What can't be seen from the bench where you sit or the jury box where the media sits is just how hard it was and is for many. Physical manifestations of just how difficult it is to stand up at this podium, to be identified, to speak while standing only a few feet away from your abuser, and for all the world to see and hear. What is unseen but not lost at this table were the shaking hands, the trembling bodies, the knocking knees as they came to the podium to give their statement and confront him, the tears that were held back, and the tears that flowed. It was not easy. It was of no pleasure for these victims, but we bore witness in this room to real and unfiltered and raw trauma. We must stop blaming victims for not speaking sooner. These were young girls who were groomed and trusted their abuser because of who he was. Just as most children do not immediately disclose their sexual abuse, these young girls were so young and did not disclose or report their sexual abuse right away because they had no sexual experience to understand that it was wrong or to question their doctor and how he touched them. They should not be chastised for speaking up sooner, but praised for speaking up now. And who would want to become a member of this sorority if they truly weren't victims? These women gain nothing by baring their soul, showing the entire world their pain. They are not bandwagon jumpers. They are not in it for some payoff in the future. Only cynical, dark-hearted people would routinely and repeatedly attack victims in their motivations. Uninformed and ignorant people who ignore true medical professionals, who would still believe that this was somehow a legitimate medical treatment, even after he pled guilty and admitted it wasn't. After hundreds of victim impact statements, and after medical professional has rebutted any legitimacy, including victims who are doctors, like Dr. Brittany Schumann, who you heard from Friday. These are tone-deaf deniers. This abuse was life-changing and life-altering, but it doesn't have to be what defines these women. They are all strong, brave survivors, and this victim blaming must stop. The parent shaming must stop. The parent shaming and blaming has become a constant theme in this case in the last few weeks. It accomplishes nothing, and more importantly, it's plainly unfounded. We are taught to trust. We have to trust. We cannot be on guard all of the time. And you expect certain people to be trustworthy. Among all the professionals that are, we are, I would argue, above all, taught to trust doctors, especially those who appear to be world-class doctors. Perhaps the people who parent shame and blame, who post comments online about the parents, or call into radio shows to talk about the parents and what they shouldn't and should have done, and have the nerve to talk about this to colleagues without even knowing that their colleague is a parent. It's a fact that was told to me this week. There's a parent involved in this case who was approached by someone giving their 2 cents about how these parents wrong their kids, not knowing that she was involved. Perhaps what those people are trying to do, giving them the benefit of the doubt, is to distance themselves so that they can believe it couldn't and wouldn't happen to them. But it could. It could have happened to any parent. This defendant fooled police officer parents, doctor parents, engineer parents. Regardless of their profession, he fooled them all. And from this case, we have learned, unfortunately, that we cannot blindly trust anyone, anymore. A parent's responsibility is to take care of their kids and to make sure that their children are safe. And these parents believed that by taking him to a trusted doctor, they were taking care of their children. They were making them safe. And the pain and the guilt these parents feel, knowing they were fooled, knowing they couldn't protect their most precious thing on earth, is real. You can feel it and you can see it in this courtroom. We saw that visceral pain and anger. The pain of a father who couldn't protect his 3 daughters. The pain of another father who chose to believe the molester over others who came forward, who blindly supported Nassar when others disclosed, until finally his own daughter said, "Me too." What we witnessed last Friday is that pain and anger come to a boil. While we know in our minds that we cannot combat violence with violence, any parent and any human can understand how a father can have that visceral reaction, especially not only as he listened to his daughters describe in graphic details their abuse, but at the same time he saw his daughter's abuser shake his head in denial. What we see in this courtroom and what we have seen are parents with broken hearts, hearts that will never fully mend because of what he did. My message to the parents of these survivors is, parents, please try to let your guilt go. Your children do not blame you. You are good parents. You're great parents. You believed your daughters. You stand with them. You support them. You will be there to comfort them, to wipe their tears, to calm them after nightmares, and to show them that they are not broken, because they are not broken. And you are not broken parents. Sterling Reithman, a survivor who spoke in Ingham County, recently said it so well. To parents, she said, "Remember, you didn't feed us to the wolf. You raised us strong enough to take down the wolf." What we saw last week, the pain and the anger and the suffering, was not limited to victims or their parents. This whole community, and many around the world watching, feel that anger and that pain and that helplessness. But there is no place for blame or shame on parents or victims. The blame and the shame belong on one person, the defendant. This community's pain and anger and suffering has to go somewhere. It has to stop. We must heal, and we must heal for our kids. The pain had to go somewhere, and we've seen where it went when it was shrouded in darkness and shame and guilt. The victims' experiences with anxiety and self-harm and addiction and depression and PTSD and suicide attempts, that's where that pain went. I truly believe we have seen the worst of humanity in these last few weeks, and we've also seen the best. We have seen pain and destruction caused by evil, selfish takers. But we have seen how one voice can start a movement, how a reckoning can deliver justice, how investigative journalism can inform and educate and empower other victims to come forward, how a community of support can empower and start healing. To the survivors and the parents and this community, I beg you to use and transform your pain and anger constructively, to fuel change, to use that anger to give you strength to fight these bigger battles ahead. Cast the shame and the guilt aside and cast it where it belongs, on Him. Don't lock yourself up in your own mental prison cell with the anger and the pain and the guilt and the shame. Let the defendant be the only one who knows the inside of a prison. This community is at a crossroads. the pain and anger from the abuse of 250 plus women and the havoc on their families and the affront to the whole community must be transformed into strength. It must blossom and bloom into change and prevention and progress. Something good must come from this. It may be hard to see from where we stand now, but already much good has come from this pain and hardship. Voices of victims are supported and believed and are heard like never before. Victims and their parents realize that they are not alone, that they are not the only ones with these feelings of shame and guilt and confusion and anger. Young women have been and are empowered to stand up for themselves. And now we can be sure that a group of determined women can transform into advocates of change. That won't stop and end here when he is taken away for the last time today. How do we continue to move forward and find good from this? Just like Larissa Boyce said, don't forget them. Don't forget the survivors. Don't forget their faces, their stories, their experience, their pain, their anguish, their strength, their bravery. And don't forget their parents and their close relatives. This good will lead us toward the path of healing and reformation. For the survivors, it takes a lot of work and determination to be free of what he did. It is something they will constantly have to overcome again and again and again, and they never know how it will present itself. It takes strength and courage and hard work to overcome what he so cavalierly took. But you have within you that strength and courage, and you have shown the world that this last month. We must seize and focus on that good, but never forget the evil, because the only way to prevent it is to first be aware of it. Sexual abuse in every aspect of society, but especially in these types of settings, lives and breeds in darkness and in secret. The only way to heal and move forward and to protect and prevent others from a similar fate is to bring it out into the open, to shed light on dark secrets through exposing the truth. I want to recenter us back to why we are here. The sentencing that this defendant has admitted to, the acts for which he has pled guilty, and the acts for which he has been convicted. Judge Cunningham, I wholeheartedly thank you and your staff for graciously allowing every victim who wanted to speak to be heard. What we have witnessed in your courtroom and in other courtrooms is unprecedented, but hopefully not the last time that victims will be heard in this manner. You have shown patience and kindness and empathy, and the encouraging words you have given each of those survivors will live with them and will show them that their experience mattered. I again thank each survivor for coming forward, for trusting us, for doing what was so hard and difficult, especially at the time of reporting, and especially to those 3 young women who came into a courtroom just around the corner from here and had to testify in court. On behalf of the entire team from the Attorney General's office and the Michigan State University Police Department, we believe you and always have. We thank you, and we are proud to stand up for and with you. You are our heroes. The work done by the Michigan State University Police Department, led by Chief Jim Dunlap and Detective Lieutenant Andrea Munford, was nothing short of tireless excellence. I am proud of the work the entire Attorney General's office team has done in this case, starting with the unwavering and full support of Attorney General Bill Schuette. We have investigated and prosecuted this case in a victim-centered, offender-focused manner, and encourage all police and prosecutors to adopt the same approach and take on these challenging cases. Over the last several days on our screen, you have seen these young, innocent faces. That was on purpose. Every day you saw strong, brave, fierce survivors come to the podium. But that's not who the defendant saw. He was attracted to and abused those girls in the picture. But Judge, what you don't see and didn't see and won't see are all the sweet, young, innocent faces of girls who have been spared a similar fate because these brave women all spoke up and never gave up. A criminal sentencing must protect, punish, and deter. Through your sentence, Judge Cunningham, I ask you to do all three. I ask you to bring these victims the justice they deserve, and I ask you to follow the sentence agreement and sentence this defendant to 40 years to 125 years in prison. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Povalitos. Mr. Newberg?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Do you wish to make a statement on behalf of the defendant? And does the defendant wish to make a statement?
He will be making a statement as well, Your Honor. The court's well aware that we have a plea agreement in this matter, and the court's aware that my client's already been sentenced 2 prior times. I'm going to ask the court follow the plea agreement. As I indicated in Ingham County, the physical manifestations of my client have not gone unnoticed. And I believe, and he believes, that the manifestations that he's gone through are a direct reflection of the powerful words from the people who've been brought before the court. Their words weigh on him. He's going to take them with him. And I know that he is sorry for the crimes that he's committed, that he's admitted to, and that are the focus of the sentencing today. So with that, my client wants to address the court.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury?
Yes, Your Honor.
Can't hear you.
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
The words expressed by everyone that has spoken, including the parents, have impacted me to my innermost core. With that being said, I understand and acknowledge that it pales in comparison to the pain, trauma, and emotions that you all are feeling. It's impossible to convey the depth and breadth of how sorry I am to each and every one involved. The visions of your testimonies will forever be present in my thoughts.
Thank you. You could be seated.
Thank you, Judge.
please. The trial court's objective in the sentencing of defendant is for me to tailor a penalty that is appropriate to the seriousness of the offense and the criminal history of the offender. The framework of an appropriate sentence consists of 4 basic considerations: the likelihood or potential that the offender could be reformed, the need to protect society, the penalty and consequence appropriate to the offender's conduct, and the goal of deterring others from similar conduct. In looking at the first factor that I must consider, the likelihood or potential that the offender could be reformed, there are no facts on this record, nor has the court been provided with any basis to believe that this defendant could be reformed. In fact, just the opposite exists. The defendant methodically planned and carried out years of molestation against children by gaining not only their trust, but the trust of the adults in the institutions who would have been there to protect them. The defendant also molested adults who trusted him based upon his reputation and credentials. Furthermore, when the defendant was interviewed in the Eaton County Jail for the pre-sentence investigation, he did assert that when he pled guilty and stated his acts were not for a legitimate medical purpose, that was not accurate. This was after the defendant had sat in an Ingham County courtroom and listened to the statements of 156 women and girls that he molested. Now, I recognize that the defendant has since reaffirmed his plea agreement and the statements that he made in support of this plea agreement. But I am not convinced that you truly understand that what you did was wrong and the devastating impact that you have had on the victims, their families, and friends. Clearly, you are in denial. You don't get it. And I do not believe there is a likelihood that you could be reformed. The second factor the court is to consider is the need to protect society. There is absolutely no question that society must be protected from Larry Nassar. It is unfathomable to think about the number of victims that would have been spared had authorities acted upon the complaints received years ago. But that is a discussion for a different time in a different place. Today, the issue for this court, the responsibility of this court, is to exercise the authority that I do have to protect society from you, which is what I intend to do. The third factor is to consider the penalty or the consequence appropriate to the offender's conduct. The offender's conduct has been described in this courtroom, and the impact of that conduct has been shared with the court. I have heard from individuals that participated in gymnastics, soccer, figure skating, rowing, softball, cheerleading, wrestling, diving, dancers, track and field, and others who were not in sports but had suffered back, knee, or other injuries. The conduct of the defendant has robbed these girls and women of one of the most truly important human qualities, trust. Many have struggled not just to trust men in general, but it has impacted their relationships with their fathers, grandfathers, uncles, brothers, husbands, boyfriends. This is because of the grooming done by the defendant. The defendant getting both the victim and their families to trust him, leaving each of them to question, if Larry was nice and I trusted him, how can I be sure others that are nice to me will not hurt me? It is heart-wrenching to hear from mothers afraid for their children that many of the normal motherhood, childhood experience is being overshadowed by a fear and an anxiety that they have for the well-being and safety of their children caused by your acts. The conduct of the defendant has caused suicidal thoughts, anxiety, depression, sleeplessness, nightmares, eating disorders, migraines, lack of concentration, self-harming, anger, confusion, loss of self-worth, panic attacks, feelings of humiliation, guilt, embarrassment, and an addiction to prescription medications. Each and every one of those individuals suffers from some level of post-traumatic stress syndrome. Your conduct to get into a position of power at institutions like Michigan State University, USA Olympics, and the gymnastic club has shaken their faith. And because they were required in many instances to only see the defendant as a doctor, or some did seek him out because of his reputation as being the best, their physical injuries were in fact either not treated or not treated properly. Many have undergone numerous surgeries and are still in pain due to not being treated properly. The results for some of these victims will be lifelong physical ailments. The depth and the tragedy is incomprehensible. It spans the country and the world. It has impacted women, children, and families of varying ages, races, and walks of life. Individuals that have suffered physical and emotional harm as a result of your actions live all over the country and the world. I have heard statements of individuals that live in Michigan, Delaware, Arizona, Colorado, Ohio, Florida, Nevada, Chile, London, and France. It is also evident that there are an infinite number of victims that still have not been heard from or counted. Your criminal conduct did not just hurt the victims, but it also hurt everyone who cared about them. Your conduct has impacted every aspect of the lives of each of the women and the young girls. I have heard and considered each of their stories. Their stories are not redundant, even though many of the descriptions of the grooming by the defendant were eerily similar. One victim made the observation that often one victim is seen as a tragedy, but 100 victims are seen as a statistic. That concern is understandable. It is not true in this courtroom. The ramifications of each person is unique, and each person's thoughts and feelings are important. Each voice and each story does make a difference. After listening to all of these statements, consideration on this factor is difficult. What is the appropriate consequence or penalty for your conduct? Your conduct, when considered and looked at from the viewpoint of the victims and their families, can only conjure up thoughts of public punishment and retaliation. When a crime involves a child, when it involves an adult harming a defenseless child, it is only natural to think in terms of an eye for an eye and to want revenge. This is a doctor. You are a doctor. You took an oath to do no harm, and you have harmed over 256 women, and that is beyond comprehension. But from the eyes of the court and from the justice system, the role of the court is to determine an appropriate penalty or consequence within our justice system that is allowed as an appropriate consequence. Locking up an individual so they can never harm anyone again and take away their freedom is an appropriate consequence. For a person like the defendant, you have lived an idolized life. You are a prominent doctor in our society. You are the member of an Olympic team. You have been pampered and lived a high-class lifestyle. And now the result will be spending the rest of your life in a small prison cell. I'm sure that is unthinkable to you. But you will be left to sit there with only the memories of destroying your own family. And I do not believe that you will have the ability to shut out the words of the children and the young women and the adults who trusted you and who you let down. That will be your lifetime consequence. The other goal the court has to consider is deterring others from this type of conduct. The sentence in this case must send a message. If you molest and sexually abuse children and women, if you use your position of trust and authority to gain their confidence, and then you betray them in the worst way possible, the result will be that you will spend the rest of your life in prison. Now, the sentencing guidelines in this case were actually for a minimum of 108 to 180 months. However, count one did carry with it a statutory minimum of 25 years. Further, as I have stated previously, the party sentencing agreement is that the minimum would be for 25 to 40 years to be set at the court's discretion. But the court must also set a maximum number of years. I have heard it has been reported, and somewhat confusing, that the defendant could receive life. That is not accurate based upon the agreement. Also, it is ironic because if the defendant were to be sentenced to life, he would actually be eligible for parole at some point. When the court sets a maximum number of years, the defendant must serve that number of years before he is eligible for parole. The Michigan Department of Corrections has requested a maximum number of years of 100, and you have just heard the Attorney General request 125 years. So, considering my analysis of the sentencing goals as my guide, along with the sentencing guideline, the Attorney General sentencing memorandum, the pre-sentence investigation and report, and the comments of Ms. Povolitas, Mr. Newberg, and the defendant, it is a sentence of this court, and you may stand, sir. You will serve 40 to 125 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections. I believe this sentence is proportionate to the seriousness of the circumstances surrounding the offenses and of the offender. I am also required to inform you that should something happen and you would be released, that you must register as required by the Michigan Sex Offenders Registration Act and comply with all requirements of that act. You must submit to Global Position System monitoring and comply with all the requirements of the system as directed by your field agent. You must submit to HIV testing and complete counseling regarding HIV and AIDS. You do owe 204 in state costs, 130 crime victim assessment, 500 in court costs. You will be subject to lifetime electronic monitoring pursuant to Michigan law, and the issue of restitution will remain open to be determined within the next 3 months. This sentence is to be served concurrent to Ingham County Court Docket 17-526 FC and is consecutive to the federal court case. Because you entered a plea, you do have the right to seek leave to have your sentence reviewed on appeal. If you cannot afford appellate counsel, one will be appointed for you. If you wish to exercise that right, you must do so in writing within 42 days of today's date. Mr. Newberg.
Your Honor, he's received his notice of appellate rights for providing that to the court staff.
Ladies and gentlemen, this now ends the criminal legal proceedings involving Larry Nassar. I realize that it does not end the emotional and physical suffering he has caused. I am in awe of each of you, and I appreciate your efforts to provide me with your statements, flying in from Europe, all over the country, submitting videos, taking time off work, missing classes. You basically put your lives on hold. You will always be in my thoughts and prayers. That is all.
All rise.